Hey guys, today's a really bad day. Uh, Kafka got nerfed quite quite heavily. Her kit got changed, and a bunch of stuff about her is just different. And honestly, it sucks compared to what her kit used to be, but I get what they're doing with her. It is a massive nerf comparatively, I will say that, because her values are lower in terms of damages, and her whole dot thing is now gone, where she would increase the dot damage that dots would do and blah blah blah. But the trade-off, right, is the fact that they made her more consistent with her dots, right? They made her much more consistent with her shock. And what do I mean by this is that now her ult does the dot, right? Her ult does the shock. And whenever you use her talent, whenever that triggers, it applies the same shock. So the whole thing with Kafka now is you want to constantly upkeep your shock and your dot on that person, right? Of course, this means that you don't gain the extra damage bonus from other dots that are applied, but she will always have a shock on the enemy, right? As long as you can maintain these two between her technique being triggered and her skill, things will be fine. This, however, comes with some bad news. Because of this change, this means that a character like Sampo is much more important for the dot team, because Sampo actually increases dot damage, right? But you don't necessarily have to run Sampo. If you really want to focus on the dot damage of itself, then yes, you can run Sampo, right? However, it's a thing where it's a weird thing now. Be because there's no reason to use Serval with Kafka anymore, right? Because originally you would have run Serval and Kafka together, because Serval extends the duration of shock, right? But because Kafka now does that in her kit by herself, that frees up that slot for Serval. Serval and Kafka don't work together anymore, right? Because the same dot from like one character that will then overwrite, right? So you don't want that. So whatever the most recent dot is, it gets refreshed and it gets overwritten. And that's why it's always good to have several dots and different types of dots. So the synergy between those two is now gone, which frees up an extra slot. If you want to run Sample, you can, but from what the leaks are showing, we won't really need Sample. There's going to be another dot character that is coming out that works around dots, right? Not just like their own dot, but they work around dots in general. When a dot is applied, they gain bonuses, the team gain bonuses, and their skill winds up giving you a uh, a Silver Wolf or a Pele type effect where it decreases the enemy's defense. So that can potentially make up the difference that has been lost from Kafka's kit, where she enhances dots. And since that's a dot based character, they'll both work together in conjunction with each other. So right now it seems bad, but in the near future it's going to be pretty good. Unless they don't change that character's kit or they tweak it a little bit where it is still the same resemblance as it's been, then things will be fine, honestly, for dot teams. Right now, it just looks a little shaky because of the Kafka changes, because Kafka was the main backbone for this sort of thing. But I guess that'll just be enough of me ranting about the whole dot situation. It's still fun, it'll still be viable. You definitely need to put in a bit more work now. If you want to increase the dot damage, then you have to run Sampo for now. You don't have to, considering Kafka can permanently keep up her own dot now, right? Her own shock state. And I still would suggest Kafka and Luca together, even though, right, Kafka changes, Luca still applies bleed, and as we know, bleed is really strong, and the fact that you always have shock up is also incredibly strong. So I still would suggest just run these two. You can run Pela as a debuffer, or Silver Wolf actually, if you have her. You know, you can run something like that, and it's gonna be a lot of shredding going on with that. Silver Wolf may be a little bit weird, actually, now that I think about it, but it is what it is, man. Anyways, getting on to the actual topic of today. What are the Kafka changes? What are the massive nerfs? Let's just get through these, right? When it comes to Kafka's skill, right, her Caress and Moonlight, before, the main thing was, if the target, which is the second sentence, if the target enemy is currently receiving dot, all dots currently placed on that enemy immediately produces damage equal to 90% of the original damage. That's what it was before, and now what it does is it got nerfed by 15%, so now it's down to 75% of that value. Of course, these skills are leveled. As you can see, they're level 10, but at the same time, losing that 15% is really huge, right? That 15% of a damage difference is massive, and I will not lie about that. It is pretty massive. Next, if we were to, let's say, look at her ult did get changed, where the old ult was deal lightning damage equal to 80% of Kafka's attack to all enemies, a 100% base chance for enemies hit to become shocked, and immediately take damage equal to 100% of the dot shock lasts for 2 turns, while shocked enemies receive lightning dot equal to 299% of Kafka's attack at the beginning of each turn. And there's the small sentence that says deal minor lightning damage to all enemies with a high chance of shocking them. The enemies are currently shocked. The shock status deals damage 1 extra time. So what changed here is, as you can see, the damage and the base chance is the same, but when you get to the second sentence, while the enemies are shocked, that damage got decreased by 9%, and the extra damage that you would get from that other sentence is now gone, right? So that got removed, which sucks, because once again, that means her whole thing about her dots and the damage is currently being lowered, right? But the trade-off here and what Hoyo is thinking is they're making Kafka easier to use, right? They're making her more self-sufficient, right? Which I guess, and that's fine. Me personally, I did enjoy her old kit, but I get what they're doing here and I understand why. And here's where the biggest change is, and that comes from her talent, which is her follow-up attack. Normally, her follow-up attack is the selling point of her kit, because the follow-up attack was the one that increases the dot damage. But as you'll see here, right, nothing seems to have changed so far. If we're looking at the old image, where after an ally uses a basic attack on an enemy, right, Kafka will immediately launch 1 follow-up attack and deal lightning damage equal to 150 of her attack to that enemy, with a base chance of 100 to increasing the dot damage received by the enemy by 22.5% for 2 turns. This effect can only be triggered by once. This was the main thing about Kafka. That sentence right there. The fact that the dot damage received is increased. That means every dot, right? And that's why Kafka was like the core to the dot team. Like, that type of synergy that she had was phenomenal, right? I understand they nerfed her because maybe in playtesting they realized, oh my god, that's really strong, right? We have to tone it down. We have to do something. Change that they did, sure. If we look at what it does now, right? What it does now, it of course got a damage nerf. It's now 140, which I don't know if that's actually true, because before it was level 15 in the showcase. Now this is level 10 at 140, so maybe it may be higher, towards the end of it, or it could be the exact same as 150 at level 15. But so far it's showing us 140 at level 10. But what it does now, right? With a 100% base chance to inflict shock equivalent to that applied by her ultimate to the attacked enemy for 2 turns. So instead of increasing dot, it now does the shock that her ultimate does. And what does the shock that her ultimate does? That is 290% of KAFKA'S attack at the beginning of each turn. So you are getting 1 instance from her ultimate, right? That 290 is going to be up for 2 turns. Then once her talent triggers, you are applying that same instance of her ultimate. So think of her talent and her ultimate as the exact same dot, right? It's just 1 dot, but it's being refreshed over and over again, right? So let's say you use KAFKA'S ult, you then apply the dot, right? You then attack, KAFKA does the follow-up. The dot then refreshes. As long as you are attacking and KAFKA is using her follow-up, the dot will then refresh itself. The whole point of this is to ease her and using her, so you don't have to build so many characters around her and form this dot team, which personally I would have wanted, because it's fun and it was fine to me, right? I enjoy these type of games where it is complex for almost no reason, right? And to form something around that, even though it may not be the best, it may not be the most optimal thing, you can take something out of it and build on it. Make it your own, make it really cool, and make it capable of doing something. Let's move on to her technique, and that reads, it'll immediately attack all enemies within a set range. So it's an AoE type of one, and after you enter battle, you'll deal lightning damage equal to 50% of KAFKA'S attack to all enemies, with a base chance of 100 to inflict shock to every single enemy for 2 turns. Right? While shocked, enemies receive lightning dot equal to 182% of KAFKA'S attack at the beginning of each turn. That's the old version, and for the new version, it immediately attacks all enemies within a set range. Of course, after entering battle, it deals damage to 50% of KAFKA'S attack to all enemies. Base chance of 100 to inflict shock equal to that applied by her ultimate on every single enemy target for 2 turns. Right? So what changed here is it lost the damage percentage from KAFKA'S attack. Instead, we're scaling off of her ultimate, right? The shock applied from her ult. So what you really want to do when it comes to building KAFKA is honestly focus on her ultimate, because most of her damage comes from her ultimate. The shocks go from there. Her technique, her skill, things scale off of her ultimate. And I think this technique is actually better, because the fact that that shock gets applied, and we know that once that's there, we can infinitely refresh said shock. And I think in the long run, I'll say that for my closing thoughts, but I do have more thoughts about the KAFKA nerf / rework. And of course, if we get to her passives, her traces, those got changed as well. If you look at torture right here, what it used to do was when KAFKA using her skill ultimate, right, the chance for DOS to immediately deal damage increases based on a multiplier, and the multiplier is equal to 0% of KAFKA'S break effect up to a max of 0. That was her old effect, right? Now what it does is the base chance for ultimate technique or the follow-up attack triggered by the talent to inflict shock increases by 30%. So what it does, it just increases her effect hit rate Because you know in the game where we get higher and higher in difficulty, enemies have increased hit rate. So this is just a way to guarantee that her shock will land more consistently. Think of it as free effect hit rate without having to go into it, and I think that's fine. I do think that's fine. A more consistency, right, over a chance of more damage. If it smooths out the gameplay and the character's core mechanic, I think it's a good trade offer. Then, if we look at Thorns, the talent has a 20% increased base chance to increase the dot that the enemies receive, increase the ultimate base chance as well by 30% to shock enemies. So once again, this is just more effect hit rate right here. As what Torture's new one, this is what Thorns used to be. So what what Torture does now is when the ultimate is used, enemy targets will now immediately receive damage from all currently applied dot sources instead of immediately receiving damage from the currently applied shock state. So this used to be her old Eidolon 1, if I remember, because they did switch this around, and this is what it is now. So I guess this is where the synergy from other dot users come in handy. So if you have Luca with the bleed will then now proc immediately instead of the shock, which is good, right? This is of course the best part about Kafka. Torture is fantastic, and the fact that they changed it to her Eidolon 1 is incredible. There's no other way to describe it. At least Torture is like good, right? Like Torture is honestly good. That is like a huge saving grace for Kafka. Torture being the way that it is incredible, right? There's no other way to describe it. Torture is fantastic. It is quite honestly her saving grace. Like, I wouldn't discredit Kafka just yet. Next, let's finish off with her Eidolons, right? So I guess with the Eidolons, we could go through it, right? So for her old Eidolon 1, we know that got changed to Torture. So let's look at what her Eidolon 1 does now. What it does now, when the talent triggers a follow-up attack. So when she does a follow-up, there's a 100% base chance to increase the dot received by the target by 30% for 2 turns. So her Eidolon 1 is what you want. And her Eidolon 2 is also what you want. Kafka, honestly, oh boy, it's so good. I kind of don't even want to go through the rest of her Eidolons because like these were just bad. All it did was increase her break efficiency. No one really cared about her break efficiency. It's good to have that increase because it did scale off of her old trace, which makes sense. But for now, oh man, her new Eidolons are fantastic. You can stop at Eidolon 2 for Kafka, perfectly fine, right? But if we go further than that, look at her Eidolon 4. When an enemy target receives damage due to shock inflicted by Kafka, she regenerates 2 energy. Dude, do you know how often that enemy is going to be receiving shock? It's when a target enemy, right? If you inflict shock on multiple enemies, oh my god. And there's 4 enemies, right? 8 energy, just like that, right? It starts at the beginning of their turn. Oh my god, her Eidolon 4, crazy. That's a good Eidolon right there. That's a real good one. If you go to her Eidolon 6, the damage multiplier dealt by shock technique or the follow-up attack is increased by 156%, and it extends it by 1 turn. Oh my god. That is some damage. 156%. Jesus Christ. Alright, I will not lie to you. Kafka Eidolons are really, really good. Are they mandatory? No. If you do want to get her Eidolons, Eidolon 2 is a really comfy place that you can stop with Kafka. However, Luca has the same thing where dots are increased as long as he's on the field. So you don't necessarily need her Eidolon 2. If you plan to run Kafka Luca, which I argue is the most optimal way to run dots, right? You can run Kafka Luca sample if you want as well, but like, that's perfectly fine. But you can forego her Eidolon 2, stop at 1, and you're set. You are honestly set just like that. Her Eidolon 4, damn, her Eidolon 4 is kind of crazy. It is kind of crazy, and it is really nice. Eidolon 6, that's just extra damage. If you want to go for that, go for it. But Eidolon 4, really want to stop at that? All that extra energy? I can see that being a thing. Once again, our Eidolons aren't necessary. 1 is fantastic, 2, you can stop. You know, these changes to Kafka, it was very surprising, but after reading what they were and how everything operated, I understand why it happened, right? Because if you look at it before and read the values and look at the showcase, yo, it was kind of bonkers. It was ridiculous what was going on. That damage was insane. And it was really good. It was really good. But I'm really curious to see what happens now. To have a permanent shock be up at all times, man, that sounds kind of crazy. I'm really curious, what is that damage going to be, right? Because now that Starrail doesn't work, that frees up a slot, right? I still argue that Kafka Luca is a thing. You can run Sampo to increase the dot damage, right? You can do that if you want. But so far, for my thoughts on the Kafka nerfs, man, I'm really fond of her old kit because there was a lot of nonsense that you could do, but I'm okay with it. If this upcoming character that comes out is currently going to remain unchanged, then I'll be perfectly fine with it because I know how their kit works and it still synergizes in the same way that Kafka's old kit used to work, and you would replace Sampo with them. So that's perfectly fine because they have a defense reduction on their skill, right? And it ties into dots. As long as there's a dot, they are winning, they are gaining something. So, me personally, I think this is okay. In Kafka of herself, I know what they're trying to do, and I perfectly understand it. Yeah, let's make Kafka more consistent. It may seem that she's more selfish now, but no. When you look at it, she is a much more consistent character. Her damage won't be as heavily reliant on dots, in which you would have had to find another way to inflict a form of dot on a character. But now that she can permanently upkeep it and it works well with her kid and with other characters, we have something here, right? I can see the upside in them doing this. There definitely is an upside here. I just wouldn't be doom posting immediately and saying, damn, Kafka sucks now, Kafka is this, Kafka is that, Kafka is like horrible, don't roll for her. Nah, there's no reason to not roll for her. If you like Kafka, then you should definitely roll for her. I made a video talking about her being a must-have, and I truly believe that based on her old kit, because it was nonsense. Even if she wasn't like on a dot focused team, her damage that she would output and help with would still be so far above what is now. But this is a nerf, right? And it is a rework. It's a consistency change, and it's an ease of use change. It may not be the best change. Maybe we could have kept the old one but lower some of the values, yeah, but I get it. I get it. You honestly have to do what you have to do with this. And when it comes down to this, I'm okay with this. Right. Me personally, I still am going to roll for Kafka. I believe that she's still going to be a fun and strong character, especially with some of the newer units that are coming out. And that's another thing I want people to take into account, right? While this game is still new and some people are over the honeymoon phase of it, and the way that they look at the game is in the immediate sense, this game has years of content down the line, right? Like a Genshin, right? If you look at the game in the now, of course you're gonna hate what you see. You can of course wait for Kafka's rerun banner. You can definitely do that, sure. There's no problem in that. But for you to dismiss the character altogether, I think that's wrong, right? Because future characters are going to come out, their kits are going to be there, their kits are going to be changed around, there's going to be more synergy as the game continues. So to flat out dismiss a character for being bad or XYZ, I don't agree with that whatsoever, right? Because I feel like every character has their use, right? A game dev wouldn't release a character if they didn't have a use or they're just flat out useless, right? When I first started playing the game, fun fact, I thought Dan Heng and Herta was like the worst characters in the game. They served zero purpose. Quite literally, low tier God speech about them every single day. You can ask my friends. I hated them so much. And look at me now. Dan Heng is my best DPS character because he is that good, right? Dan Heng and Su Sheng, incredible characters right there. Herta, if it wasn't for Herta, I wouldn't have cleared so many content in the game. Actually, a lot of memory of chaos, a lot of Forgotten Hall, a lot of simulated universe. Like there is stuff where having Herta made life so much easier. You have no idea. For those that were stuck on what was it, Forgotten Hall 13, was it? That one, if you know about 13, or was that a 13 or 12? Either one of those. That one where having AoE comes in handy. I think you had to fight Bronya or something like that. Oh my God, was Herta so good for that. Herta was fantastic for that. But, ugh. And that's where my point comes in, where a character isn't useless. You have to find a use for them. Yes, Kafka will not be as strong as she used to be, but she now has a use, right? She is a consistent damage dealer on your team that will always upkeep damage and have a consistent form of damage going. She still bleeds into other dot units and she still will benefit from them. The dot team isn't dead yet. So that's it for today's video. I'd like to thank you all for watching and stay tuned for more Honkai news, updates, and content. Later.